So I'm going to begin. We're up to 28 people and with almost 50 more to go. So welcome everyone. I'm very pleased to present Paul Connett and but I first will introduce myself. I'm Tracy Frisch. I'm the founder or maybe the co-founder of the Clean Air Action Network of Glens Falls. We formed in March of 2019. We're a grassroots organization, all volunteers, and we welcome everyone who's participating to become an active member. And we will be in touch with everyone who is at tonight's program next week. It's mostly local people, but we do have people from other parts of the country, many of whom are dealing with an incinerator in their neighborhood. I have my friend's dog visiting me right now. I want to just introduce Paul Connett. Now, I first heard Paul in the early 90s in Albany when I lived in Albany, and he was hysterical. He did a Monty Python routine about what, and you know, how many talks do you remember that occurred almost 30 years ago? So I'm really pleased to have him tonight. We also had Paul in Greenwich maybe 10 years ago. So Paul has had a long extracurricular career fighting incinerators, inspiring other people to oppose them with lots of information, and also promoting zero waste all over the world. He's British, as you will soon see, and he got his bachelor's degree from Cambridge University in chemistry and his PhD at Dartmouth College in New Hampshire in chemistry, and then had a long career from 1983 to 2006 at St. Lawrence University teaching environmental chemistry and toxicology. I hope I got that correct. And you are now in for a very interesting presentation about incineration and zero waste and why one is a good solution and the other is not. So without further ado, I present Paul Connett.
Thank you, Tracy. I'm assuming I'm now full screen. Is that correct? Am I full screen?
Yep.
Yep. Okay. Well, Tracy, you were kind enough to introduce me, and you said I was funny back 30 years ago. Well, if I was, I'm going to show off a little bit. This is the one area I show off on, and that was when I was a student at Cambridge. I was an exact contemporary of John Cleese, of Monty Python fame. So whatever crazy things were working on his brain were also working simultaneously on mine. So forgive me sometimes if I go a little bizarre. That will be the Monty Python coming out. Anyway, I'm going to be talking tonight about incineration, the problems of incineration, and the better solution of a zero waste strategy. I am the former director of Work on Waste USA, and I'm currently the director of the American Environmental Health Studies Project. And an outline of my talk, I'm going to start with a fuller personal introduction, especially my involvement with waste. I'm going to then talk about the global picture, then the arguments against incineration, and then the 10 steps to zero waste. So as you've heard from Tracy, I'm a retired professor of chemistry. I've been researching waste management since 1985, and this issue has taken me to 49 states in the United States and 69 other countries. The last one was Turkey last year. In 1986, the Hudson Falls incinerator was the fourth battle that I was involved with, the fourth incinerator battle I was involved with. The first one, of course, St. Lawrence County, then it was Rutland, Vermont, and then Claremont, New Hampshire, and then Hudson Falls, New York. And I remember those many, many trips. I would take down 91 from Canton, New York, all the way down to Glens Falls, Hudson Falls, to participate in some frustrating meetings. Now, to update that history between 85 and 95, and I see Neil Seldman is watching on. Hi, Neil.
Hey, Paul. Lovely. Good to see you.
Yeah, between 1985 and 1995, along with the Institute of Local Self-Reliance and others, Work on Waste helped communities to stop the building of 300 trash incinerators in the United States, so-called waste-to-energy plants. And they've only built one incinerator in the United States since 1997. The industry is essentially dead here. It's just that those that manage to squeeze through their lives are being prolonged far too long after the idea became completely obsolete. Well, now I'm going to switch to my PowerPoint as I've got to some pictures. Let's see, I've got to do share screen. Let's see if I can get this to work. I think I'm getting it to work. And now I click on the PowerPoint. Yes, and now I'll click on there. And let's see, is that full screen? There we go. Are you sitting? Okay. So since 1998 or 9, I've been promoting, 99, I've been promoting zero waste around the world, particularly in Italy. And for some reason, I'm not advancing.
Oh, I just screwed up.
Okay, it's all right. I'm promoting zero waste. Do you have full screen?
I just screwed up because I was trying to get rid of everyone's picture and I stopped you from sharing. And now I have to figure out how to do that.
All right, well, I'll go.
So sorry. I am so sorry. I am, share screen, no.
All right, let me ask to share screen. I'll say share screen.
Okay.
And now I click on this.
Okay, great. Okay.
Now I will click on this. I was just saying that I've been promoting zero waste since 1999. And in the course of this, in 2013, I published this book, The Zero Waste Solution, which has a series of essays at the end, including one from Neil Seldman. So if you want to know more about zero waste than you get tonight, there is a book to back all this up. And actually this book is largely based on the presentation that you see tonight. The full title of the book is The Zero Waste Solution, Untrashing the Planet One Community at a Time. And the word untrashing was taken from this movie, which was hosted by Jeremy Irons, in which I was featured a few times. Basically, Jeremy went around the world looking at incinerators and landfills, pollution of the oceans and so on, and finally ended up in San Francisco with zero waste. And I think that my book essentially begins where this movie ended. So if you haven't seen the movie, this would be a good trailer to the zero waste talk. Now I'm going to start then with the global picture. Different times demand different questions. In the 20th century, we talked about waste management. And the question we asked was, how do we get rid of waste efficiently with minimum damage to our health and the environment? And that sounds like a sensible question. And still, people are still asking that question today. But really, they should be a little further ahead than that, because in the 21st century, we're no longer talking about waste management. Or we should be talking about is resource management. And now the question becomes, how do we handle our discarded resources? They're not waste until they're wasted. How do we handle our discarded resources in ways which do not deprive future generations of some, if not all, of their value? And that essentially is the definition of sustainability. So in the 20th century, we were talking about waste management. The key issue was safety. Everybody was talking about dioxins, toxic metals, ash landfills, and so on. In the 21st century, we should be talking about resource management, and the key issue is sustainability. Unless you've got another planet to go to, that is the #1 question for all of us. Now, we would need 5 planets if everyone consumed as much as the average American. Astounding, isn't it? Meanwhile, India and China are copying our consumption patterns. So clearly something has got to change. And in my view, the best place to start this change is with waste, because waste is the place where people connect with unsustainability. All the time we're making waste, we're part of a non-sustainable way of living on this planet. But given good leadership, we can all become part of a movement towards sustainability, which is what zero waste is trying to do. In essence, what we're trying to do is to convert a linear economy, which is what we've had since the Industrial Revolution, to a circular economy, which is the term in vogue in Europe. They're all talking now about a circular economy, how to get there. And one of the things they've recognized that incineration is an obstacle. It is exactly the opposite of what we should be doing. More about that in a moment. So the linear economy is 4 steps. It begins with the extraction of raw materials, transport of these raw materials around the planet, the manufacture of products from those raw materials, and then the consumption of those products, some would say overconsumption of those products, and then in a relatively short time, waste. And there are huge global impacts from this linear system. In fact, all the environmental problems that we're talking about today are a reflection of this short-sighted approach to handling resources, material resources on a finite planet. But one of the key things is we use an enormous amount of energy extracting raw materials. We use a lot more energy in transporting these around the world. And then we need more energy to manufacture products, and then more energy in transport in the other steps. And all of this energy use, by and large, unless we're using solar, is producing carbon dioxide, which is contributing to global warming. In my view, the real global issue is overconsumption on a finite planet. Global warming is the symptom of overconsumption on a finite planet. It's nature warning us there's something wrong, that we're doing something wrong. So the question then is, how do the different ways that we traditionally handle waste or discarded materials, how do they impact this linear economy? Well, landfilling. If we bury our waste, we have to go all the way back to square one, back to extraction. And therefore, you've got no movement towards a circular economy. It's business as usual. Landfilling is business as usual. Incineration is the same. If you burn these materials, everything you burnt, you've got to make all over again. You go back to square one, and there's no reduction in global impacts, and you're certainly not moving towards the circular economy. In fact, incineration perpetuates the linear economy. Incineration is the last gasp of the linear economy. It's burning the evidence of a bad approach to living on a finite planet. On the other hand, if you talk about recycling, you see you go here with the arrow, you go to production, you've cut out all the impacts of extraction. And if you go to reuse of the whole product, then you cut out both extraction and production. And similar arguments pertain also to organics, if you compost the organics. So now we've got to part 2 in my talk, actually part 3, the arguments against incineration. Incineration is a waste of energy. Now, isn't that strange to say that? Because that is the #1 selling point of incineration. It's waste to energy. We want waste to energy facilities. Sometimes resource recovery. Well, it's the opposite of resource recovery. It's resource destruction. But let's have a look at this claim of energy. It's a waste of energy. Now, it's the difference between looking at this thing locally and looking at this thing globally. If you look at it locally, you produce a little bit of energy. You would produce a little bit of energy if you burnt the Mona Lisa, but I don't suggest you do that. But what you're doing is you're wasting globally, you're wasting a huge amount of energy. Let's go back to that diagram in a moment, because you're wasting the opportunity to recover what we call the embedded energy, the energy you put into extraction, manufacture, and transport. So this energy here, and the energy here, and the energy here, the extraction, production, and transport, none of that comes back to you when you burn your materials. You don't save any of that. You only get a little bit of the calorific value of the paper and the plastics. On the other hand, if you recycle and reuse and compost in the second cycle, you are saving this energy. So this is why we say that incineration is a waste of energy, because you don't get back the embedded energy. And here's a table produced by a consulting company in Canada, and they compared the energy you save when you recycle a ton of these materials in green, this first column, and then the column in yellow is the energy you would get if you burnt that same material. And look at this for PET plastics. This is the PET of plastic bottles, water bottles. And you notice that you save 26 times more energy by recycling PET bottles than you would get if you burnt them to create electricity or generate some electricity. So it is sad that there are some people who think they're being green and they're being, responsible by saying, oh, look, we're going to recover energy by burning this material. It's actually an environmental crime to burn these materials and waste the embedded energy, which you can recover by other means. Incineration does not get rid of landfills. I think you know that, because you've got one, you've got both the incinerator and the landfill in your area. For every, you get at least 1 ton of ash for every 4 tons of trash that you burn. And there are 2 kinds of ash, the bottom ash and the fly ash. And most European countries treat the fly ash as hazardous waste. So I say, think of the incinerator as 3 boxes. The first box is the furnace. That's where you burn the waste, and that's where you use the heat to generate electricity in a turbine. That's box 1. Box 2 is the air pollution control equipment that you try to capture all the nasties that come out when you burn these materials, and we'll talk about that in a moment. And the fly ash is about 10% of your total, very toxic. The bottom ash is toxic, but the fly ash is very toxic. And then you need a third box. And the third box is where you put the ash if you capture all those toxic things. Now, in the United States, we have a bogus way of testing the toxicity of the ash, which means that all across the country now, the ash is safe, deemed safe, and they do it by mixing the fly ash and the bottom ash before they test it, even though the 2 kinds of ash are produced in different parts of the city. It's completely contrived and bogus way of assessing the toxicity. And in some places, they use the ash as final cover, daily cover of their landfills. And in some places, they have monofills specifically designed for the combined ash. And I think you can see from this picture of the ash landfill in Haverhill, Massachusetts, we don't get rid of landfills. These monofills are huge. And that is on the banks of the Merrimack River in Massachusetts. Now, incineration puts extremely toxic substances into the air. These include acid gases. A big concern here is hydrogen fluoride, hardly mentioned, and another one, nitrogen oxides. Nitrogen oxides are expensive to capture because they're not acid. Nitrogen oxides are not acid when they're produced in burning. They form acid rain later. But so you can't neutralize them with an alkali in a wet scrubber. So you have to use a complicated urea injection, very expensive. Then you have toxic metals. The metals, of course, elements, you can't destroy them. The best you can do is to capture them in the ash. Then what do you do with the ash? Well, the worst is that they get into the air. And then, of course, you have newly toxic, newly formed substances in the burning process. And one of the things which got me going back in 1985 was to discover that simply burning household trash, whether you did it in an incinerator or in your backyard, produced the most toxic substances that we've ever made in a chemical laboratory. In those days, in the 90s and the early 2000s, we were all talking about dioxins. Now we're talking about PFOS, PFAS. These are the dioxins of the 21st century. Now, before we go further, this is a slide that Mike Ewell, I think you've heard from Mike already, explaining that the Wheelabrator, Hudson Falls incinerator, is ranked #1 in dioxin emissions in 2018 in New York State, #1 for dioxin, #1 for beryllium, #2 for cadmium, lead, mercury, and #3 for arsenic and chromium. So you are living near a major source of pollution in New York State, especially for these exotic chemicals. Now, you need 3 things to protect the public from incineration. You need strong regulations, but that's not enough to protect the people. You also need adequate scientific monitoring of your facility. And thirdly, you need tough enforcement. Now, if either of the monitoring or the enforcement are weak, as they are in New York State, as they are in the USA, then strong regulations won't protect you. But unfortunately, we don't even have strong regulations. So the public is simply not being protected. It's all a sham. It's all a public relations exercise to make the DEC and other regulators feel that they're protecting the public when they're not. Incineration is poorly monitored. Dioxins traditionally have relied on occasional, once a year, 6-hour tests. These are called spot tests. So you go in, the company has a month's notice before they're tested, usually. They go in with the probe, put it in the stack of the incinerator, collect a sample for 6 hours, do that 3 times on one day, take it, send it to a lab. Their lab analyzes the filters, and then a few months later, somebody might know what was coming out on that particular day. And this system misses startup, shutdown, and upset conditions. I'm getting a lot of crackling on my end. I hope that you're getting decent sound your end. Anyway, these spot tests are useless. They miss these places where you can get increases of over 1,000 in one day. So some countries are now using continuous sampling, 4-week sampling. Instead of collecting a sample for 6 hours, they collect a sample for 4 weeks, and that does pick up upset conditions, startup and shutdown. And even these are underestimating emissions. And what we need today are people need to collect chickens' eggs produced near the incinerator at different distances and measure the dioxin in those chickens' eggs. And I'll explain that with an example now. This is a study that was published in the Netherlands in November of 2008 by a group called Toxico Watch, and it was distributed by Zero Waste Europe. Zero Waste Europe. You can look at, you can find it on this webpage here. Now, basically what the Dutch did here, their latest incinerator, which was built in 2011, which the Minister of Economic Affairs described as the best incinerator in Europe. It had all the bells and whistles, more air pollution control equipment that you've got on in Hudson Falls, I can assure you of that. And then they did something for the first time in the Netherlands. The Netherlands have been using these 6-hour tests like you do in New York State and then we do in the United States. But then they decided to do not just the 6-hour test, but the 4-week test side by side. Same incinerator. So now you see this table, you see the first line is a 6-hour test, and you get a very low admission. Then you get 256 hours, that's 4 weeks. And you see, if you go to the third column in red, those concentrations, now I'm talking concentrations here, not the total. Obviously for 4 weeks, the total is going to increase. This is standardized to concentration. The concentrations measured were over 1,000 times higher than they measured in the 6-hour test. And when they did it again, it was 460 times higher. And then they looked at chickens. Now, chickens are a marvelous biomonitor because the chickens are eating the soil and all the microorganisms that in turn are concentrating dioxin of the dioxin that falls on the surface, on the soil. They're consuming all those and you're getting quite a bioconcentration factor. Well, they measured the dioxin in chickens' eggs near this state-of-the-art incinerator, and you see all these levels are much higher than the acceptable level, which is 1.7. I think that's the law in the Netherlands. They want it below 1.7. And here is where the chicken's eggs were monitored. The blue arrow tells you where the incinerator was, and the orange ones are the ones which are way above the 1.7 level. And you don't get to the green ones until you're several kilometers away from the plant. That's what you should be doing in Hudson Falls. And when you get your results back and you find those high levels, you should demand that the DEC close this monster down. The major problem with dioxins and related compounds is that they are highly persistent and they accumulate in the food chains, in cows. Now, here's a little bit of history for you. When I first came down to Hudson Falls in I think it was 1986, may have been, yes, it was 86. A big issue was, for me, that one of the places of major impact when they did their dispersion model was very close to the dairy farm that was producing milk and dairy products that were going to the whole county. And I said, well, you should be calculating how much more dioxin you're getting from that milk and cheese and everything else than you're getting from inhalation. Well, the promoters called in a consultant, they paid him a lot of money, and that consultant came back and says, my calculations show that if you look at what you get from the air through inhalation and you look at what you get from ingestion, it's about the same. Absolute poppycock. When we actually did the calculations, my colleague Tom Webster and I, and we presented them in a conference in Japan, we found that someone drinking 1 liter of cow's milk in that dairy farm that we're talking about would have got the equivalent of 8 months of breathing the air next to the grazing cow. So that consultant completely misled not only Hudson Falls decision makers, but of course the DEC as well. The administrative law judge took his calculations at face value and ignored ours. Now, since then, our calculations have been validated in spades. There was a group in Germany which measured the dioxins in cows, and they calculated that a freely grazing cow consumed the equivalent of about 10,000 I forgot the number of cubic meters of air, but it worked out it was equivalent to 14 years of breathing. In one day, a cow puts into its body that you would take 14 years of breathing next to that cow to put into your body. It's astronomical. So people see those tall stacks on the Hudson Falls incinerator. Oh, it's going to be diluted, dispersed. But what they don't realize is that nature will reconcentrate in chickens' eggs, cow's milk, beef, you name it, pigs. So dioxins steadily accumulate in the human body fat, and the man cannot get rid of the dioxins in his body fat, but the woman can by having a baby. And that is the nuts of this problem in a nutshell, is that the highest doses of dioxin are going to go to the fetus. The pregnant woman is accumulating dioxins in her body for 20 years or so, and then in the 9 months of pregnancy, they're transported from her body fat to the fetus. And the problem with that is that dioxins interfere with fetal and infant development. They interfere with a number of hormones, interfering with both sexual and mental development and the immune system. Linda Birnbaum, who wrote the paper that you can see here, has just retired from being head of the National Institute of Environmental Health Sciences. She was one of the people at the EPA with enormous integrity, and it transferred to her leadership at the NIEHS. A whole book has been written in a language which people can understand about dioxins, which were the archetype of what we now call endocrine disrupting chemicals, interfering with the endocrine system, interfering with hormone levels and activity. A marvelous book. It is the equivalent of Rachel Carson's Silent Spring for the 1990s. So going back to these emissions. Now, the development in the 21st century, which has made everything worse, is that we now know that these very toxic substances, a large fraction of them, are coming out on the surface of nanoparticles, both the toxic metals and the dioxins. And I want to explain the problems of that. First of all, if you want to get up to speed on this, an excellent paper about how these nanoparticles are formed in incinerators and why they are so dangerous for health. So that's a good start. Now, the key thing here is there's no regulations and no monitoring for nanoparticles emitted from incinerators. The DEC does not regulate these because incinerators, they regulate the particulate, the 10 micron particles, and maybe they're going down to 2.5 in some places. But they completely miss regulating these nanoparticles, which are less than 1 micron. Now, these particles are so tiny, they evade the air pollution control devices, they get through the fabrics. And secondly, they are so small, they can squeeze through the membranes. They get between the lipids and the proteins and can squeeze right into the bloodstream where they are distributed throughout the body and can enter every tissue in the body. And here you see a nanoparticle in brain tissue. And using the electron microscope, you can also identify, see these peaks here, the different elements in this particle. And it says lead, barium, chromium, iron, silicon in this brain tissue. Now, I've used this slide literally thousands of times since the early 2000s when I first got it. And I used to leave it at this point. But now, in the last couple of years, we are now finding the dangers, the health damage that these particles may cause, not only the brain, but other tissues. So here's some quotes I'd like to share with you. This is from The Guardian. This is last year. We know that the finest particles from dirty air can reach the brain via both the bloodstream and the nose, and that air pollution has been implicated in increased brain inflammation, damage to nerve cells, and to changes in stress hormone production, which have been linked to poor mental health. Okay, another paper. Here's another one. Oh, I'm not, what's happening here? I can't advance. For some reason, Tracy, oh, there we go. Now, a paper published in November 14, 2019, in the journal Epidemiology. They said a 1-year increase in pollution exposure of 10,000 nanoparticles. Now, let me explain. 10,000 nanoparticles is less than 1 billionth of a gram if the particle was iron. 1 billionth of a gram. And you've got 450 grams in a pound. So 1/500 billionth of a pound in 1 cubic meter could raise the risk of brain cancer by more than 10%. So you're living in Hudson Falls with many more nanoparticles per cubic meter in there. And who's doing the brain cancer epidemiology in your area or any of the other incinerators in New York? Now, the lead author of this paper was Scott Weikenthal, and this is what he said. Greater exposure to combustion nanoparticles produced by fuel burning could increase people's chances of getting brain cancer, according to a new study in the journal Epidemiology. This is the first study to suggest a relationship with the incidence of brain tumors, although previous work has shown that nanoparticles can get into the brain and they can carry carcinogenic chemicals, all of which I have said. This study was done in Montreal, and I think they compared with Toronto. It was published in Epidemiology. He says, anytime you burn anything, these small particles are produced. These particles are so small, they can get into our bloodstream and into our brains. And once there, they can do significant damage. And they say these particles were first observed in human brains in 2016. Sorry, they were observing these in Italy in the early 2000s. The air pollution has also been associated with memory problems, which may or may not be nanoparticles. It may be larger particles than that. This is a study done of women in their 70s and 80s, published in the journal Brain. And they showed a relationship between air pollution levels and declining memory and Alzheimer's-like brain atrophy in their counterparts. And this study is from Mexico City find similar results, not for adults in 70s and 80s, but for teenagers in Mexico City. And another disturbing thing is these nanoparticles have been found in mothers' placentas. So we're getting to the embryo as well. This is very scary stuff. And I'm not here to scare you. The science is scary, and I have to tell you what the science is. But now I'm changing gears. Even if you could make incineration safe, it doesn't make sense in the 21st century. Our task is not to find better ways to destroy materials. Our task is to stop making products and packaging that have to be destroyed. Now, that is a central message of zero waste. In other words, waste is a design problem. We have to design waste out of the system. That's what the zero waste strategy attempts to do. So the waste problem will not be solved with these magic machines. I'm sorry to the engineers out there, but you've got to be turning yourself to low technology and organization. We need better organization. We need better education. We need better industrial design. That's where we need the engineers in the third step. In the first step, we need hairdressers. We need school teachers. We need people that are used to educating the community. And we miss this when we go to high-paid consultants and engineering companies to solve what is essentially a social problem. So I'm going to talk a little bit now about the zero waste around the world that I've seen with my own eyes. And I've brought this down to 10 steps to zero waste. 10, what I consider to be practical, cost-effective steps. It's like a staircase. If you look at the whole jump to zero waste, it's pretty daunting. But if you look at it step by step, it's like a staircase. You can do it one step at a time. So here are all 10 steps laid out for you. And I'm going to go through these one at a time. Source separation, you're doing that in Hudson Falls. Door-to-door collection, you're doing that in Hudson Falls. Composting, I'm not sure how much composting you're doing, but I think you're doing some. Recycling, reuse and repair. I certainly you have places near you that have got excellent reuse and repair centers, and I'm anxious to see those evolve into community centers. More about that in a moment. Then something new. We need a zero waste research center, a combination of university professors and the people that are leading the zero waste movement in the community. Economic incentives, particularly the pay as you throw the system. The more you make, the more you pay, or the less you make, the more you save. And then before you settle on a landfill at the end, there are things that we can do in front of the landfill. And we can do even more research at the landfill itself. So going through these 10 steps, source separation, it's these 10 things which make waste. You make waste by mixing. So obviously to unmake waste, you have to separate. Then you're dealing with resources. And one of the most resources that we need to separate out and get clean is organics, because organics is a large fraction of the waste stream. And if you handle that with low tech, you've solved a big chunk of your waste stream. And it's also the fraction which causes the problems in landfills with the odor and the vermin, etc. Step 2 is a convenient system to pick this up door to door. There are other ways of doing it, but the door to door is the most efficient. And to get the organic fraction, you need door to door collection. You need that personal oversight to make sure your organics are clean enough so you can use them in agriculture. In San Francisco, this is their door-to-door collection system. Once a week, they have 3 containers. Each household has 3 containers. Each business has 3 containers, one for the recyclables, one for the compostables, and one for the residuals. In Italy, they have a more elegant system. On different days of the week, the same trucks, no extra trucks, pick up different materials on the same day. As I say, using the same truck. On Mondays, you pick up the organics. Tuesday, the multi-material. Wednesday, the paper. Thursday, the residual fraction, and so on. In Spain, they've copied the Italian system. In Basque Country, same idea, different days of the week, picking up different materials. Notice a hotter climate, 3 days they pick up the organics. Here you see the system. And there's a nice Spanish twist to this. You're looking at the mayor of Anani here. And on this wall, which is the back wall of a popular sport played against the wall, you have the brown containers for the organic waste. And they are being put on hooks instead of on the ground. And each household has a number. That's the number that's on their hook. Only they, that household, can use that hook. And on that hook, they can only put the containers from their household, which has that same number. Here you see 1870 on the container 1870. You don't even need a wall. You can do it with stainless steel posts as well. And this looks very attractive, very well organized in a community, creates a great impression. In Castelnuovo, Sicily, they have developed a very special collection system because they have very high, steep streets, narrow streets, and so their collection system is the Rakusa donkey. And the donkey goes around house to house and picks up the organics on one side and the recyclables on the other. And the citizens love these donkeys. They feed them carrots and things. The tourists love these donkeys. And there's a lovely human story here because this guy that looks after the donkey was an alcoholic. He missed many days of work. But since he's had this donkey and he meets the citizens and he meets the tourists, he feels very well. He's happy, well adjusted, and he hasn't missed a day of work since they introduced this system. But it underlines a very important principle. Zero waste is not just about recovering material resources. It's also about recovering human resources. People need jobs. People need respect. That man has a job and he has respect. We see this written large in places like Brazil and Colombia and Costa Rica and Argentina, where they are now recruiting the catadores in Brazil. These are the people that picked waste from the landfills. They do it because they can make a good profit out of it, but it's dangerous, especially for their kids and their family picking through the raw waste landfills. Now they've won the right and the contracts to pick up waste directly from the households. And with their little trucks, little carts of various sophistications, they take these to large warehouses where more catadores are separating, getting them ready for market, baling them correctly, and then shipping them off to market. So now the catadores are involved in all levels of the recycling operation. And indeed, they've won a lot of respect in Brazil. Step 3 is composting. And according to the World Bank, composting would decrease solid waste in developing countries by 50 to 80%. Of course, it's not as much as that in our northern countries, but it's still a very important tool. And you've seen typically, and Neil can confirm this, you've seen communities going from paltry 25, 30% recycling rates to 50, 60% quite quickly once they introduce source separation of organics, both for yard waste and for food waste. So there's a hierarchy here. First, with organics, we need to feed people. We waste too much food in this country. In the United Kingdom, they have a group called Fair Share, which fights hunger. It organizes a collection of food from supermarkets, hotels, and gets these to homeless people. So feed people. Secondly, feed animals. Animals, we used to feed animals a lot with discarded food. We can go back to that, at least on small farms. And then we need to feed the soil. I like to say we need healthy soil to produce healthy food, to produce healthy people. Composting hierarchy. We need to start locally. Do as much composting as you can in your backyard. That's the single biggest contribution to solving the waste problem in Hudson Falls for an individual is to compost or have a worm bin in their backyard. And then you can expand this. You can do it in schools. You can do it in universities. You can do it in prisons. You can do it in hotels. I know some hotels that do anaerobic digestion to make their own fuel for the kitchens. Then you need community composting, where you share. You may not have enough room in individual gardens, but you can do it as a community. And then on farms, we should use particularly our small farmers, give them an extra source of income to pay them to take the clean organic, not the dirty, but the clean organic waste collected door to door and pay them to compost it. And then finally, we need a centralized facility, which also could be anaerobic digestion. So here's an example of community composting in pristine Wales. Here you see the community loading the compost that they made from last year into barrows, putting it on the gardens, and there you see the gardens producing all these products, and then the community can share in those products. So I love it, and this is the easy. I mean, if you've got a lot of space like that, it's easy. But what's exciting about Neil Seldman is on this call, and Brenda Platt, his director, I think now, used to be his employee, but now he's his director. They are showing that the same kind of thing can work in a big city like Baltimore, and it's very, very exciting. You're not only harnessing the food, you're improving the diet of the people, you're improving their life, their quality of life, you're developing communities. There's such a win-win-win situation with community gardens producing community food in cities. Now, just to show you the importance of door-to-door collection, remember that Hanani, the village of Hanani, they had door-to-door collection in those brown containers? Well, they are getting, I've got to move my slides here. Let me see if I can move this. I can't read what's at the bottom. Okay, the purity using that brown container on the hooks, 99.76% pure organic. Now that is incredible. If you're over 95%, you're doing pretty well, 99.76. So this is a very good example to counteract those people that say, oh, the people would never do it. Well, if it's in the interest of the people, if they see this as in the interest of their children to conserve resources and protect them from stupid things like incinerators and landfills, they will do a good job. This community of Anani was fighting a proposed incinerator, so they did a darn good job, and you could get the same darn good job from Hudson Falls if needed. Again, all right, okay. Yeah, in San Francisco, they've recognized that a big chunk of their organic waste in that tourist city is going to come from hotels and restaurants. So they've made it 25% cheaper for hotels and restaurants to put out these big, in this case, big green containers than putting out a black container of mixed waste. You save money by separating out the organics. And the city employs people to go to these restaurants and hotels and explain exactly what can go into those green containers and what shouldn't, because this material is destined to go to this composting facility about 70 miles north of San Francisco. You'll notice it's surrounded by farmland. The farmers are using the compost to grow fruit and vegetables that go back to San Francisco. Another thing, 200 vineyards in California are using the compost from San Francisco to grow their grapes, because it reduces the amount of irrigation you have to do. Compost holds onto water and it trickles it to the roots when they need it. Here's an example of a very low-tech composting operation from Italy. In fact, the slide was given to me by Enzo Favorino, who leads one of the great leaders of zero waste in Europe, also knows more about composting than anybody else. And he's also a wonderful resource for citizens. If you have any question about composting, I'll give you Enzo's email address and he will come back with an answer in double quick time. He's an amazing man. He can speak English faster than most English people can, certainly faster than Americans. In Malaysia, I was able to see some pretty novel, well, in one case, not quite so novel, but you might have a quick answer to this. I went into this shed here. You see all these troughs, and in those troughs, there's 150 tons of organic waste, including cow manure. Now, my question for those, and you can't answer me because I can't see you, but what is in those? What's doing that? And the answer is worms. You're looking at an example of vermiculture here, and this is something you could do in American cities because it's odorless and it's inside. But even more exciting was this. So I was taken to this another industrial building in an industrial site, sort of, what do you call it, industrial area where they have lots of industries, fairly clean industries like computer industries and so on. And when I went in, I found it was amazing. They were using the black soldier fly, which is common to Asia, black soldier fly larvae to eat their organic waste on an industrial scale. So here are those lovely larvae. They are voracious. They eat every ounce of organic waste that you can give them. And they're doing this on an industrial scale. There are several floors like this where you've got all these shelves, and I'll show you what one of those shelves looks like. Here it is. I pulled the shelf out, and I'm looking at the larvae is in my hand. They just tickle a bit. And you see those brown things there? That's the only thing that's left from a watermelon after these larvae had consumed it. Now, there's two products out of this system. First of all, the black stuff is a good quality compost, like worm castings, and the flies themselves, the pupa, are harvested, frozen, and used for chicken food and for fish farms. So it's a high source of protein. A marvelous system, absolutely marvelous system, which can be used in, as I say, in a big city. And they're doing it in China and other places. I think this is, you're looking at the future here. And there's the chief marketing officer for this company who showed me around. And I can give you a copy of my slide presentation afterwards, or I'll give it to Tracy and you get it from Tracy. In addition, in Malaysia, I also saw small-scale anaerobic digestion, and this one was located in a food market and was digesting all the food, producing a biogas, and also producing a fertilizer for people's gardens. And you can also do this on a large scale. But anaerobic digestion on a large scale is very popular in England. Recycling. Well, in San Francisco, their recycling facility is on Pier 96. Here you see the separation lines. It's a very exciting operation. This company has the contract to pick up the 3 containers in San Francisco. It owns the recycling facility and it owns the composting facility, but it doesn't own the landfill. In other words, it has no motive to make waste. It's sending the waste to its competitor. So it wants to, the minimum amount of money it spends on its competitor, the best. It wants to recycle and it wants to compost. In other words, what you're looking at here is the transition from a waste company to a resource company making money out of its resources. It's a resource management company, not a waste management company. And another thing which I'm excited about, it's owned by the workers. These workers own everything. In Argentina, we see another thing. I talked a little bit about Brazil. You see the same thing in Buenos Aires. They're taking, in their case, the carteros, what do they call them? Anyway, the equivalent of cartoneros in Brazil, they are putting them into materials recovery facilities, very clean operations in the city, and they are moving the waste pickers as fast from the informal sector to the formal sector as they possibly can. So this man, during the night, has gone into these big brown containers at the side of the streets in Buenos Aires, and when he goes inside, he puts a stick to hold the lid up, and anybody that knows that that stick means there's a human being inside, and don't pick it up and enter it into a trunk because you could kill that person. People have been killed here. But that's what he's done throughout the night. And here in the early hours of the morning, his goodies, his recyclables that he recovered from there, he's going to make some money from the middlemen who will pick it up. But what they're doing now is giving those people a clean job, decent working conditions. They can educate their kids. Here's a woman who used to be cartonera. A cartonera. Now she is an environmental worker working one of those materials recovery. I had the joy of speaking to all these waste pickers at a meeting organized by Greenpeace, because believe it or not, Buenos Aires, despite this wonderful developing system here, which is getting all these people employed to recycle, and they could expand that to people doing the same thing in the rural areas doing composting, they want to build 6 trash incinerators in Buenos Aires. It's sickening. Step 5, reuse, repair, and community centers. I've got to speed up. Reusable items are only 2% of the total, but they're worth well over a third of the value of the items, the disposable items. Urbanor has been doing this for over 30 years, grossing $3 million a year, 37 full-time, well-paid jobs. When you go there, it's like a shopping market of secondhand goods. You can buy anything under the sun, literally anything under the sun, you can buy secondhand. My jacket here cost me $6. This tie cost me $3. You can't see my trousers, but they were $6. A valuable item, building materials, very valuable, including things like doors and windows and fitments and so on. And in Burlington, Vermont, which is not too far from you, they have they take people off the street and teach them how to learn how to repair large appliances, small appliances, electrical goods, computers, and then help them to get a job. And they're also linked to deconstruction businesses which take down old buildings, old barns, old churches, you name it, collect the lumber. Some of it's used in new buildings, some of it's used to make furniture. This is beautiful wood from a barn made into lovely furniture. So you're looking at value-added enterprises that can be linked to reuse and repair. So reuse and repair creates a circular economy for reusable objects. You talk about a circular economy, it's already there. That's what it is. Job creation, job training, you link to deconstruction, link to value added, community education, demonstrate backyard composting, worm bins, collection depot for household toxics, community development, recreating the village in the anonymous city. That's one of our goals here, to fight overconsumption. And finally, we can have fun with reuse centers. Let me give you an example of a place. They don't have much fun in Sweden. They don't have enough sunshine, poor things, but they have developed a very exciting reuse park in Gothenburg, Sweden. Very large. You drive to it. You bring your kids with you. When you go in, there's a band playing to welcome you. When you go around, there are clowns to entertain the kiddies. And when you go to the toilet, it's an art gallery. But my favorite is this dog. This is the famous dog that can separate mixed recyclables into 6 different categories. Now, I say, think big. Incinerators are boring. Landfills are boring, and they are produced by boring bureaucrats and boring business people. We need more people with creativity, with a larger vision, a vision which would match the demands of the 21st century. And one of the people that has that kind of vision is a guy called Eric Lombardi. He wrote an essay at the end of my book. And he says, look, the problem with when these villages, when these towns put out a contract for waste management, the only people that can afford to go through this process are big companies, big waste companies that want to build landfills and incinerators and gasifying plants. The little companies which do the real work, the reuse, the recycling, the composting, etc., are usually small companies. And so what you've got to do is to try to develop a consortium that will design an eco-waste park where you do everything at one site, a site that the community can be proud of. But to get that, Hudson Falls needs to vote in people with vision, imagination, and creation. And they're certainly not people that put up with a contaminating facility that you have right now. Now, steps 6 to 9 attempt to minimize the residual fraction. Step 6 is a zero waste research center. This is where community responsibility and industrial responsibility come face to face. The community has to say to industry, if we can't reuse it, if we can't recycle it, if we can't compost it, then industry shouldn't be making it. We need better industrial design for the 21st century. So this is where we see the 4th R. Everybody knows the 3 R's, reduce, reuse, recycle, which includes composting, the 3 R's. That's community responsibility. And many communities are doing a good job of that in the United States. But what we haven't had up till now is much of the 4th R, which is redesign. That's industrial responsibility. And we can get that by using our university professors to set up a zero waste research center. Not in the university, that's too easy. That's the ivory tower. I want to see these zero waste research centers downtown, working with the decision makers, working with the activists, working with local people to develop these things. The first thing they can do is to study the residual fraction, see what we're dealing with. They did that in Italy. Number one is textiles and leather in the residual fraction. Number two is diapers. Number three is organic waste from the kitchen. And that tells you some of the things that you have to do, including reusable diapers. One of the things that they found thousands of were these disposable coffee capsules from a company called Lavazza. Here they are, thousands and thousands of these. And they wrote to Lavazza and said, we're a little community of 100,000 people. We're a zero waste community. We're up to 83% diversion, but we keep finding your coffee capsules, which we can't do anything with in our residual fraction. What can you do about it? Well, 2 days later, they got a phone call from Lavazza saying, we would like our experts to meet your experts and see if we can come up with a solution. Well, run the clock forward. Now we have these coffee capsules. We have recyclable ones, which I don't like too much. We have biodegradable ones, but the one I use and have been using for over a year and a half is a reusable one that goes into the same machine. I wash it out. I put 2 spoonfuls of beautiful coffee. I put it in the machine. I push the button and I get a cup of coffee as good as I would get from one of these plastic capsules. For a year and a half, I haven't produced a single plastic capsule to throw away. So Zero Waste Research Center, we want to involve local universities, locate in the community, examine the residual fraction, identify non-reusable objects and non-recyclable materials, recommend better industrial designs, and then find out what they're doing around the world. You can start with my videos and these PowerPoints, see what they're doing around the world, see what you can copy, see what you can improve on. And here are some of the things going on around the world. In Ontario, Canada, they've been reusing glass beer bottles for over 60 years. They say those beer bottles go around 18 times. They save an enormous amount of money doing this and keep lots of plastic bottles out of the thing. In Italy, there are stores which allow you to refill your own bottles, shampoo, detergent, water, milk, honey, detergent, olive oil, my favorite, vino rosso, vino bianco. And then in Indonesia, they're encouraging people to use these pumps for either for trade, but you know, what is the stuff, the favorite stuff, the advertised on TV or the generic brands. One of those bottles is 1 liter. That's equivalent to keeping out of the landfill and the Pacific Ocean 1,000 of these plastic sachets for shampoos and detergents. And if you do this in a village, the village can afford one of these, whereas the individuals can't. So you can save a lot of money while saving the environment. In Italy, they're getting plastics out of school cafeteria, replacing it with glass, ceramic, and stainless steel. They're replacing disposable diapers with reusable diapers. This is an Eco Bimbi, zero waste baby. And all over the world, you have communities and countries which are banning or taxing single-use plastic objects, bags, straws, bottles. Every day another country comes along, all over the place. And then step 7, economic incentives, pay as you throw. Here it is. Assuming that you have your basic trash fee handled in your taxes, then we're talking about a surcharge. Now, there's no surcharge for the compostables. There's no surcharge in the system. There's no surcharge for the recyclables. But for the residual fraction, the more you make, the more you pay. Or the less you make, the more you save. Now, in Seattle, it works like this. Every citizen household has the choice of what size container you use. You just pay more each month the bigger that container is. So it's a very simple system to launch and exploit. In Italy, they have these reusable bags for this residual fraction. It's got a chip in it. Now here, the secret is they're collected once a week, but you only pay when you put them out. So some people don't put them out for 4 weeks, so they're saving a lot of money. So how can we get closer to zero waste using step 7? How far can we get? In Italy, these figures from Italy are absolutely astonishing. Out of 40 provinces in Italy, 40 provinces out of 108, They're above 65% diversion. That means using all these techniques, how much you keep out of the landfill. 65% diversion. The four best are over 80%. And Treviso, which is a population of over 1 million people, are getting 88% diversion. And this is Italy. This isn't Germany or Switzerland, who are famous for their environmental consciousness. This is Italy. 2,950 municipalities in Italy are over 70%. Over 1,000 are over 80%, and 112 are over 90%. And the figures have gone up since 2017. And a better measurement actually is kilograms per person a year. The 510 municipalities, their individuals are only producing 75 kilograms, that's 150 pounds a year. Many are below 50 kilograms, 100 pounds a year, and some are lower than 40 pounds a year. Wow. San Francisco, population 850,000, very little space, 80% diverted by 2011. And they've kind of plateaued out at 80% because the slow factor here is getting industry to take on its responsibility. So going beyond 80%, there are things that we can do. And one of them is to build in front of the landfill a residual separation and biological stabilization facility, sometimes referred to MBT. In Nova Scotia, these are built in front of the landfill. There we are in front of the landfill. No waste can go directly to the landfill, which is at the top of your screen. They have to go through this facility where the bags are opened, the material is separated, they pull out more recyclables, more toxics. The dirty organic fraction goes to the end of the conveyor belt where it's shredded. It goes into long troughs where it is turned every day by this machine. It sits there for 18 days composting, and then it's cured outside before it goes into the landfill. In other words, biological stabilization above ground, either composting with anaerobic digestion before you put the material underground. And anaerobic digestion might be a good candidate for that, for those who want more control of odors. That's the landfill in Nova Scotia, and you see the absence of birds there, which suggests to me they're doing a pretty good job of keeping the organic waste out of that. So step 7 then is what we call the transition landfill. It's not our ultimate for the biologically stabilized dirty organic fraction and the currently non-recyclables. And obviously with the zero waste research, we are working on those to reduce more and more the undesirable packaging and residual fraction. And I just want to end with Zanca landfill in California, near San Jose, California, where they have developed an incredible business of recovering an enormous amount of material from construction and demolition and industrial waste and producing a whole series of products. So there's even more we can do at the landfill, the final resting place, the transition landfill itself. Anyway, so by 2030, we hope we're down to very close to zero. Now, what I like about this, it starts with everybody, these 10 things. Everybody has these 10 things. But by the time we get down to step 5, or step 6 with the Zero Waste Research Center and the ultimate landfill, we are bringing in our brightest minds in our universities and in our industries to redesign the future. And so one of the things we have to do, zero waste, is going to be a great psychological boost to us who want sustainability. And when we've got it, we've got to see how it links to other aspects of sustainability. We've seen sustainable agriculture with composting, organic agriculture. You can see it with sustainable architecture when you've got reuse of building materials, etc., etc. Sustainable energy when you're using bio-generated energy, gasification of biogas generation, low temperature. So summarizing, zero waste is better for the economy, more jobs. It's better for our health, less toxics from incinerators and landfills. It's better for our universities, more meaning, more relevance for both the students and the professors to be engaged with the community, grappling with this huge problem. And it's better for the planet because obviously it's more sustainable, and it's better for our children because it gives them more hope for the future. And I don't know whether you thought about this, but every day we're depressing the hell out of our children by telling them about global warming, ozone damage, loss of forests, loss of wildlife, pollution of the oceans, you name it. We are making them so upset. We're telling them that they have no future. And that's not helpful to us. The last thing we cannot take away from them is hope. And this zero waste approach offers hope. It offers concrete hopes from the small picture of the local situation to the big picture of the global situation, more hope. And lastly, there are three final messages, and I've been using this for 35 years, these messages. The first message is to citizens. Don't let the experts take your common sense away, as they did in Hudson Falls back in 1986 when they launched this silly project. To politicians, put your faith back in people. Stop running to magic machines to solve social problems. To solve the waste problem, you need the people. You need the people educated and organizers. That's your job as politicians, as decision makers. If you don't want it, resign now and let somebody younger come in and do it for you. And then finally, to activists, very important. Even though our tasks at times seem absolutely impossible, and even though the realities are often extremely depressing, the art of survival as an activist is to have fun, is to enjoy what we do. And the way you enjoy what we do is to enjoy working with the people that we work with in these kind of battles. They really are the best people in your community, in your state, in your country, on the planet. And I, like Neil and others, have had the sheer joy of working with these people all over the world, all over the world. And it's a very privileged, exciting situation. And I must say, it's been very exciting to come back to Hudson Falls, even though it's only by Zoom. And I hope some of you were around when I was giving these talks, albeit rather primitive in those days, back in the mid-1980s. It's been a long time, but a fun journey. Thanks for listening.
Thank you, Paul. I don't know how we can clap, so I've gotten some great comments from people, and I just want to thank Tony Kravitsky and Mike Ewell and everyone else who helped make this, and Paul's friend Jay, who helped make this possible. And thanks, everyone. I will share the comments with Paul after the meeting, and as soon as I figure out how. And in the meantime, I'm going to start reading some comments and questions. I'm scrolling up. And I did, the county planner for Warren County has been at the meeting, Chris Belden, and he's announced that the solid waste plan for Warren County is now online, and I will attempt to send that to everyone tomorrow. And they're going to be accepting comments.
Well, thank you for listening. That's all we can hope, is for people to listen. Thank you for listening, and thank you for sharing that.
And I also want to mention that the Clean Air Action Network started, thanks to Neil Seldman, who's been at this talk. Last September, we started a zero waste committee. We've been meeting now twice a month on Zoom. And the focus in the last few months has been a food waste, how to develop a food waste composting facility at the county level. And we're making progress. But with the pandemic, the Public Works Commissioner, who is supportive of this, is very worried about losing staff. He's been asked to propose large cuts. So that's where we are, but we've had wonderful mentorship from Ulster County, which has last year composted 4,000 tons of food waste and made 1,700 tons of compost that it sold, good quality compost. So we have some mentoring and advice from the best. But going to the questions, I'm trying to scroll down and get to them. So bear with me a moment. There was a lot of chat. Getting closer. Halfway through, and where I think, okay. So the problem in Hudson Falls is many people fill even the recyclable bins with actual trash, and the garbage companies still pick it up. What they do with it from there, I'm not sure, but I don't know how that could be corrected.
Yes, well, there's no question. When we mean better education, better organization, we really mean that. We really mean that. And you can't just do it once, you've got to keep doing it. And you've got to try to introduce some creativity in this. It can be punitive. You can fine people if they don't keep the stuff out of the recyclables, or they put the dirty stuff in the organics. It can be punitive, but you can also do it in creative ways. There was a very exciting thing happened in Illinois. It was the second largest city in Illinois, and I forgot the name of the second largest city in Illinois. But the son of an advertising person in this community developed a fellow called the Trash Man Cometh. And this trash man had advertisements on television that said, "The trash man cometh, and he's going to make you rich." Well, once a week, the council would use the computer and select a household. And the trash man in his polka-dotted trash truck would go to that household, pick up their garbage, and take it back to their office. Then they would search through it. And if they had kept the designated recyclables out of the trash, they would win $1,000. And if someone didn't win one week, the next week someone would win 2,000, and then 3,000, and then 4,000. This was covered in the New York Times. It was covered by Japanese television with a little, and it was fun. Everybody enjoyed this. And the participation rate in the recycling program went up 400% with this one single idea. So if you can get a creative idea at the front end, you save millions at the back end. So I urge you, and you've got a committee looking into zero waste, you should be gathering these kind of positive examples which would inspire people. We want to enthuse people. I mean, I've got to the point, I don't know about people listening to this, but I've got to the point, my wife reads the newspaper every morning, she goes through it and she finds a problem. They're usually horrendous problems. They're horrible. She says, "Oh, I've got this problem. You must hear it. This is dreadful." I said, "Ellen, I don't want to hear any more problems. I've got enough problems. But give me solutions and I'll listen." And that's what we've got to recognize. People don't want to hear about any more problems, but they do want to hear about solutions. Simple things that they can do that can improve their lives, improve their kids' future, improve the community in which they're living, including their property values. And there's a lot of solutions in waste which will do all of that, but we just need the creativity to find it.
Okay, next question. During the pandemic, are materials in Warren County that ordinarily would be recycled now being burned in our incinerator? Question from Pete Tirana.
Well, Aikos, I don't know the answer to that. I suspect I do know the answer. They probably are being burnt, but I think there are certainly other ways of dealing with this virus. I don't think it lasts very long outside those droplets and outside certain surfaces. So I think if simple steps were taken, I don't think you need to burn it at all.
Right. I can tell you that the material resort, whatever it's called, the MRF in Albany has no storage capacity whatsoever. A group of us took a tour a couple of years ago, so they need to keep it running. So they cannot store things. They're and you know, so a lot of it is poor design issue.
Well, just off the top of my head, I wonder if a simple ultraviolet system, that the things went through ultraviolet system before they got to the point that anybody touched them,
Yes,
would work. So again, we just got to use the experts who are willing to work on the zero waste to come up with things like that.
I think part of the problem is that everything's in the private, so much in our region is in the private sector. So, you know, they don't really have to think through problems in that way.
Right.
So Tina asked the question, I've read about recyclables being shipped off to China and other places as waste. How do we know what is happening with our recyclables? So there's just a lot of attention to what's going on with recyclables.
What China has done a favor to the world by
Yeah.
resisting this
Here,
crap
here.
we're sending them. They've done us a favor. They are forcing us to do recycling in the United States. There'll be more jobs for the United States, more profits for the United States, and less for China. So China, I think, has done a very sensible thing. They have a huge pollution problem because they built so many huge, terrible incinerators there, huge air pollution problems. And I was in China, I think it was earlier this year. It was early this year. That's why I was in China. And
Wow.
I was there at about the time when the chairman, Xi, had passed an edict that all cities should separate, so separate. All cities should separate, so separate. And I was going to talk at this meeting, and all of a sudden, a few bureaucrats from Nanking province were going to show up. After this dictate from the chairman, over 100 people showed up. So I think I did predict about 5 years ago that China would eventually lead the world in zero waste. And I had some reasons for saying that. Number one, they have a huge air pollution problem anyway. Incineration has made it worse. And even in this dictatorial country, citizens organize to stop incineration. It's enough to force them to stop these incinerators, and they've shut down a number. Also, you've got a very good zero waste movement in China. Very, very bright people understand the zero waste issue. And also, China has a long tradition of both recycling. In fact, you can leave all the recycling to the private sector. The government hardly needs to be involved, but it's composting. China has a history of composting. And what they need to realize that if they want to make a big dent in global warming, the way to do it is composting, to take all that organic waste and get it back into the soil, and also improve their sustainability development, because it would also push towards organic agriculture. And also, when the China decides to do something, then it happens very quickly. All of those reasons were the reasons that I thought that zero waste was going to happen very quickly in China. And there was a very exciting moment for me personally about 3 years ago when I heard from a professor that heard an earlier talk of mine, and he says, the mayor of Beijing wants you to go there and give the same talk you gave to our university. And I was very, very excited about that. And then within a few months, it was cancelled because of political pressures. Presumably, they still wanted to build incinerators. They didn't want to hear me talk about what was wrong with incineration. But it was a tantalizing moment for a while, but we didn't win. Not on that occasion. But then I've told you what happened earlier this year. So there may be some hope there.
So I'm going to go through some more questions. From Madeline, you said composting is the best thing we as individuals can do to reduce our waste that will end up in landfills and incinerators. But does organic waste produce the same toxins when being burned as other types of waste, such as plastics?
No, it wouldn't. But it certainly produces nanoparticles. So you still got that issue. It isn't just what's toxic about those particles, it's access. Those particles have access to the tissues. So you wouldn't have the toxic metals, and you wouldn't have too much dioxin, but you would probably have, with incomplete combustion of bioorganic material, you would have polyaromatics in those nanoparticles. So, and they're carcinogenic. So I think why burn organic waste? Why burn organic waste when what we should, the moral imperative, if we harness food and plants produced by the sun, the energy from the plants, we should try to get that back into the soil and continue the taking up of carbon dioxide. To think about this, if you burn organics, if you burn wood, if you burn plants, the take up of carbon dioxide from that moment stops. The burning actually produces carbon dioxide, but what you burn doesn't take up any more carbon dioxide. If, on the other hand, you can get it back to the soil and grow grass, and it's they've shown in San Marin County, California, spreading 1 inch of compost on grazing land has increased the uptake of carbon in the roots of these grasses, in prairie grasses, by an enormous amount. And some people got so excited about this, they thought this may be the simplest and cheapest way to fight global warming, was just to apply compost to prairie lands. And I'm not quite sure how far that idea has developed.
Well, actually, that idea is very advanced, and the nation of France had a 0.4% challenge to get 0.4% increase in organic matter in the soil, and that would take care of climate change. I believe that would take care of carbon dioxide emissions or greenhouse gas emissions in France. If we think about it, we've lost tremendous amounts of soil organic matter, and that is carbon. And where did it go? Into the atmosphere. So, you know, it's a really good strategy. But we have seven new messages, so I want to get through. Okay. But first I want to say from Sarah, you are amazing, phenomenal presentation. Everyone in my community needs to hear from the shadows of Covanta, Plymouth, near Philadelphia. Covanta is one of the big incinerator companies.
Wow.
And thank you, Mike Ewald, for inviting some of your incinerator strugglers around the Northeast and central states. And there will be access to this video if it came out. Okay, what are the status now in Warren and Washington counties in terms of moving to alternatives to incineration? What should be the next step?
Well, we heard from the director of solid waste that they put their solid waste plan on their website. So that's a first step, is for citizens to look at that plan and see how closely it jives with what I've been talking about tonight, and then make your own contributions.
And I will just say the Clean Air Action Network, which is the co-sponsor of this presentation, one of our biggest goals is to close down the incinerator. And we welcome everyone who's on the call, especially those in the region, to join with us to make this happen. Also have another comment from Liddell. Thank you for the very hopeful presentation. I'm scrolling down. Okay, here we go. I think I might skip some because I'm having trouble actually stopping on them. I'm having problems scrolling.
I know. Okay.
Oh my God. Let's see. There's so many comments and I haven't even read them yet.
Take your time.
Okay, yes. And MRF stands for Material Recovery Facility, which is a recycling sorting center. Thank you, Mike. Okay, Nancy asked, we have a lot of thanks. We're here people are here concerned about the Poughkeepsie incinerator as well. So welcome to those in the Hudson Valley.
I noticed a very important name amongst the Poughkeepsie. It's
Joel Tyner.
No. I worked with him, and Neil would know who and Mike Ewald would know who I'm talking about. He was a councillor or a county commissioner. What do they call them down there?
They're board of supervisors, maybe, or county legislator.
Yeah, and he spent years and years and years.
That's Joel, who's now
Tyner
in Oregon, and his mother is active, has Breathe Free Duchess. So welcome to those wonderful folks. Now my scrolling. There are so many comments, which is why I'm having trouble scrolling. Apartment dweller here. Previously, my landlord had actual sorting bins outside each apartment building, then stopped several years ago. I now reside in Hudson Falls, and landlord now has his own garbage trucks to collect our unsorted trash. After getting 2 false answers as to what happens to that trash, I found out the trucks are going to the incinerator. I recycle individually, but we have no storage really in our apartments, and my neighbors are not interested. I'm going to just say to this person, I'm sorry, I can't like even see the rest of your message because of my scrolling problem, but we will be in touch, and you can email me or message me, and we will discuss what we can do. What
Yeah,
you
for
can
those
do,
people,
we can do together.
for those people, Tracy, who are frustrated by
Yes.
not being able to exercise their the contributions they would like to make on an
Yeah.
individual level, I would recommend that they consider opening up a reuse center for reusable objects. Especially, I'm not sure in Hudson Falls or Glen Falls if you've got such a thing, but they do make money. They are community builders and community educators.
Right. And that the place that you showed in Vermont, we took a field trip there 10 years ago, Washington County officials and some citizens. And I very recently interviewed the founder or the executive director. They're going so strong. They now have 4 sites around the state. And they trained 300 people. They did job training with 300 people last year.
Wonderful. So Neil Selman knows all about this. The name of his group, Institute of Local Self-Reliance. Brenda Platt said something really important. Many years ago, she said communities should not run to big machines, exhaust all the low-tech things that you can do first.
Right. And similar should not run to big waste management corporations. We should do what we can locally.
Excellent. These are your resources. These stuff that you're dealing with are your resources. Potentially, they're your jobs and they're your small businesses. And it is your air. It is your environment. So at some point, you've got to find a way to take ownership of that material. You can do it with composting. You're taking ownership of your own organic waste and you're using it to grow your flowers and your fruit and vegetables. But there are other ways you can take ownership. Certainly make sure that any opportunity the village gives you to participate, you do it, and then start trying to move the direction towards local self-reliance, local jobs, local businesses.
Yes. Okay. So I want to recognize Jackie Barg. I don't know if that's how you say your last name, who was one of the many people in Washington County involved in setting up recycling when it was a resident run project back in the late 80s, early 90s, I'm guessing, Jackie. So she asked, are there any incentives to encourage companies to get into recycling zero waste business? I suspect not. How do we move forward? Well, Jackie, we want to invite you to join with us and we can look into that together. But if Paul, you have any comments, that would be great.
It was interesting to see where some of the people started. You know, you take Dan Knapp, who's run the most successful reuse operation in the United States, possibly the world. He started as a professor of sociology. He was a professor of sociology. He was particularly interested in job creation. And with no money in his pocket at all, he moved to San Francisco from Oregon and set up a little operation at the landfill recovering materials, urban ore, recovering aluminium and you know, all those things, and made enough money out of that to build this small business. So he started as a professor, an unemployed person. I'm not saying all professors are unemployed, but you know what I mean.
That's Neil, who used to be a professor, Neil Feldman,
Yeah, he used to be
Mr. Zero Waste. Okay, so I'm gonna read Mike's comment. Our critical next step is to get the village of Hudson Falls, the town of Kingsbury, which Hudson Falls is located in, or Washington County, to be willing to do as the town of Queens, Albany County, New York, and Baltimore City, Maryland did March last year and pass a local clean air ordinance to require modern pollution controls and monitoring. This is so costly for a small incinerator like this. They burn 500 tons per day. How's that for small? I think I'm correct in that.
Tracy, I've got to have some humor in here. So there's two things. One is God recycles, the devil burns. That's
yes, okay, good.
Okay, you've heard that before. More recently, make love, not waste. Make love, not waste. So if you're too old, make friends, not waste. And I must tell you, after we'd lost the battle against Hudson Falls, a few years later, there was another battle of trying to stop the ash landfill from being built locally. I've forgotten which town it was, but one of the councillors who was
that in Hartford, maybe?
I don't know. But one of the councillors said, you know, you talk about the toxicity of lead. We've got lead in all our pencils. And I had to point out that the lead in pencils is not actually the element lead, it was graphite.
Yes.
Nice and soft. But it was, I'd never been thrown a softer softball in a waste meeting in my life to explain to this councillor that that was not actually lead, it was graphite. Anyway, sorry, I interrupted. Go on.
Okay, well, okay. So anyway, Mike is explaining what the strategy is to close the incinerator, to make it, but I think that that's a challenging strategy given where the local officials are. So we can talk to him more about that. It's not a complicated ordinance. It's actually extremely simple ordinance, but it's getting buy-in from people.
That's
but
right.
the incinerator, we will close the incinerator.
Yeah, you need to organize the people to put the pressure on the politicians. Once they say, well, what do you want us to do? Then Mike Ewald comes in and gives you the local ordinance.
And I will just say, we were going to be doing door-to-door canvassing in the spring, but clearly that was off the table with the pandemic. So Mike, do you want to read any additional questions? I'm not sure if there are any. Does anyone have a question that hasn't been addressed?
Well, we can hear people's voices. That would be nice.
Yes, yeah, we can. If anyone wants to speak, I will unmute you if you need to be unmuted.
Yes, I have a question.
Okay, I can't see who that is.
This is Claudia Michon.
Oh, yes, yes.
So this is still about pollution. I had written a question about the chemical trails coming from the airplanes. What are they and why aren't people talking about this and reporting it?
Yes, yes, right. And I said this would go to the end because that's not so much a waste question. Is Mike or Paul, do you want to address this in any way?
Well, the situation is quite simple. It's a controversial issue, and we don't have many journalists now who are prepared to risk the ridicule of investigating controversial issues. They are generally dismissed as conspiracy theories, and that is the way that industry and polluters and the pharmaceutical industry and others are dismissing all arguments, even when they're science-based arguments. I mean, I've had this battle on another issue for 20 years with fluoridation. Even though we have far, far better science indicating that fluoride damages the brain than any science indicating that swallowing fluoride is any good for tooth decay, we cannot get the major press in this country looking at that science, including the New York Times, who thinks that the issue was settled in the 1950s, somehow believing that science is frozen. I mean, it is sickening. It's sickening, the cowardice of professions, journalists. They're not being professional with their thing. They should approach these things with an open mind and look at the data. There are people out there, as far as this stuff is concerned, who've collected aluminium and barium and other materials in the areas where this spraying has gone on. And there are other people that have described and photographed a network. You look at those
Right.
trails, you see a network, you see a matrix.
Right.
And they're not investigating this, but after years and years of denying that there was anything about this, they're now beginning to suggest that this is an attempt to engineer the weather or to
Yes.
fight against global warming. So they denied it for years and years and years, and now they're admitting it. Well, why didn't they tell us this way long time ago instead of stimulating all these, whatever you call them? So is that a parrot I see in front of Claudia? Is that a parrot yourself? Because that reminds me of a Monty Python sketch. Is it
It's a cockatoo.
or a parrot? Is it a Norwegian blue?
I don't know what kind of cockatiel it is. He's very small and affectionate.
Oh, aren't they lovely? Oh, lovely. I had a budgerigar in England. Oh, I loved it.
If I can add a little bit to the issue with pollution from planes, and then we'll bring it back to the incinerator issue. I've been looking into EPA's National Emissions Inventory database, which is the most comprehensive data on air pollution sources across the whole country. And I've used that to find things like that a lot of these incinerators are the largest air polluters in their counties. But when looking at the lead data in particular, it was interesting to find that over half, 54% of all the industrial emissions of lead in the country is associated with airports, because not the big planes, but the smaller planes still use leaded aviation gas. And it adds up to about 150 tons per year of lead being sprayed into the air that's still going on. So that's pretty disturbing. But as far as things we can do more locally, the trash incinerator is the second largest source of lead in the whole state of New York. And to know that there are about, I think, 6 of the 10 trash incinerators in New York that are larger facilities than this one, and to see that this is #1 in dioxin and beryllium and number 2 and 3 and 5 other toxic metals is just shocking to see out of 350 some polluters in the state that this incinerator stands out that much. So when we're talking about things that are really hitting people's health the hardest, you don't have anything else in your area that can compare with that incinerator, at least in the county.
Yeah, and I want to say too that the DEC is way behind the science on these pollutants, way behind. They have no idea what nanoparticles can do, none. There were no regulations, as I mentioned. They are way behind the 8 ball in terms of monitoring for dioxins, and the same will apply to PFAs when they get round to those things. They're way behind. And because we were so successful at stopping incineration, as I mentioned, stopped over 300 by 1995, even the activists have gone to sleep on dioxins. The EPA never completed its reassessment of dioxin. It was on 18 years, dragging its feet because of industrial pressure. And today, they are only monitoring the chlorinated dibenzodioxins as part of their TEQ assessment. They're not monitoring brominated dioxins and furans, brominated biphenyls. They're so primitive in the United States on monitoring of dioxins and what dioxins they're monitoring. They really have little idea of what's going on. As far as plastics are concerned, I think everybody's heard now that these microplastics are ending up in the Pacific Ocean, more plastic pieces than fish, than plankton. But there was an article 2 days ago when they are finding a huge tonnage of microplastic particles are falling on the national parks, wild areas. So these, and what is that all about? And that's why incineration is so bad. It takes tons and tons of material in handleable forms and literally with heat pulverizes it into trillions and trillions of tiny particles with a massive surface area. So the potential of, say, cadmium, which is added to a plastic, the potential of cadmium to reach a human being is magnified thousands of times when you burn that piece of plastic containing the cadmium, because now the human being is exposed to it in the form of a nanoparticle. And water trickling through, going through a landfill is exposed to a huge surface area. These are simple principles, but the DEC has no idea. And I found this out just a few weeks ago. Some of you know I got embroiled in a local fight to try to stop them burning lithium-ion batteries in Endicott, New York. A community, incidentally, has already been poisoned by IBM with trichloroethylene. They literally got thousands of houses which vent the trichloroethylene. And when the DEC came in, gave them an air permit without doing an environmental impact statement, even though people are living across the street from where this facility is, I mean, literally across an urban street, and kids are playing baseball right up to the fence. They didn't require an environmental impact statement. And they accepted the dioxin measurements made from the sister facility in South Korea based upon one measurement lasting 4 hours. That's all. 1 4-hour test to extrapolate to 5,000 hours of operation. And then as far as hydrogen fluoride, the DEC should have known enough about lithium batteries to realize that there are many fluorinated compounds in those batteries. So you've got a PFA problem. You've got polyvinylidene difluoride as a separate a binder. And in the electrolytes, there are fluorinated compounds. And they accepted one measurement from that plant. And they said, oh, the fluoride compounds is 0.1 parts per million, 0.1 milligram per cubic meter or whatever. 0.1. That's what the DEC accepted based upon what the company told them. We did our calculations based upon the lithium-ion battery fires, and that facility is producing about 100 pounds of hydrogen fluoride potential, 100 pounds of hydrogen fluoride an hour. And the DEC is supposed to regulate a pollutant like that if it produces more than 100 pounds a year. It's producing 100 pounds an hour. It has that potential. But the DEC just took 0.1 parts per million as the number that they determined as regulations and decided they didn't have to regulate it. Hey guys, we are paying these people. We are paying their salaries. It's about time they employed some chemists and toxicologists who were able to temper what the company tells them is coming out of the spout, temper that with information that they can get from chemists and toxicologists about what elements are in the things that they're burning. And they should be doing that with any new source of incineration. The public is not being protected. It's a scandal. And Mario Cuomo, our hero on COVID, right? Our wonderful hero, Mario Cuomo, put a $1.75 million subsidy into this plant. The plant got $1 million and another $750,000 to monitor the facility when it comes into operation in Endicott. And what we're trying to do now is to say, hey, take that $750,000 and go and monitor the facility in South Korea, which is in an industrial area where the nearest community is 3 miles away, 3 kilometers away. I mean, this is so, I mean, it's not like they missed it by a small factor. They're missing things by a huge margin because there's a political agenda operating from Cuomo's office, political agenda, and they are falling into line. And I think it's time to, this is exposed, that everybody knows about this. And if they can't do something right about a brand new facility, how are you going to hope to help them, hope that they're going to do anything decent with your facility? So the message is clear: shut the thing down, get the thing shut down. It's an intolerable imposition on every elderly person, every baby, every fetus in your area.
Thank you, Paul. I want to, and I think that's a really good point. When I was beginning to publicize this, someone asked me, can it be better regulated? That is not where we want to go. There is no logic. It is an insane proposition to burn stuff it's a factory for creating pollution and health problems. And we have to look at it as such. But I wanted to ask you about, we're in a dairy area. We have lots of Washington County. Hudson Falls is in Washington County. Washington County is the largest dairy farm area in the whole Hudson Valley, from New York City to the Canadian border. And what should we be concerned about?
Well, you should certainly be monitoring. You should insist upon monitoring of the cow's milk, even if you do a combined sample from dairies. You should definitely be getting that. But what they found in the Netherlands, and I had this in my presentation, the quickest way you can biomonitor these things is to collect chickens' eggs. It's cheap. Collect chickens' eggs within certain distances from the plant. And even if you don't get them measured straight away for dioxin, because it is expensive, collect them, chain of custody, have somebody with a legal person to note where the chicken's egg was collected, when it was collected, put it in the refrigerator, chain of custody, so that when you do have the money to monitor these chickens' eggs, it will stand up in a court of law.
I think that's a fantastic idea, and we should definitely work on it. I've been worried about dioxin ever since I bought my land in 2003. Yeah, is there anything else that someone wants to say or ask before we close the meeting? And we've had some other wonderful comments thanking you, Paul, but I'm kind of hard pressed to find it. I like that you tell it like it is and expose our leaders, Andrew Cuomo, who are taking our money yet letting us all down.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, I'm sure he's done some good things. I like the way he went about banning fracking, at least the lateral, whatever it's called. I like that, and I think he's very good. Like his father, he's very good on social issues and like that kind of thing. But Mario Cuomo was a lousy environmentalist. He was not helpful to us. He waited until the snow was black in Albany before he closed down the Albany incinerator.
Right. My neighbors are the ones who started going to city council. I lived in Albany for 16 years and who raised that issue and got it shut down. And I always noticed the soot on the windowsills.
Yeah.
But didn't know about the incinerator. It was a state incinerator. Okay. Michael, would you like to ask a question?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, yes. Hi. Paul, thank you for your presentation and your inspiration. I live in, Maryland. I used to see you years ago on Long Island in the 80s when you were on public TV up there. My question is, it's been a few years, I'm going to say probably 10, since I last looked at the incinerator in Harford County, Maryland, where I am, which is just north of Baltimore. It's close to the sort of mouth of the Chesapeake Bay. And at the time, my recollection was that they may have been over limits, but they were waiting for the EPA to come up with a new standard before, somewhat understandably, putting in expensive equipment, because the standard might be 1 part per million versus 0.1. So my question is there any national standards for air pollution that are relevant to incinerators that are in the process of being promulgated that would give any incinerators a legitimate reason for not installing equipment? Or can we go after them and say, no, the limits are out, they're been settled for a while, and you're not meeting them?
No, I think it's the other way around. I think there are pollutants that should be monitored, that we should be doing. And I think that one of the issues is a big issue, is nanoparticles. And again, because of this issue in Endicott, I said, well, look, I know it may be difficult for you to monitor the nanoparticles coming out of the stack, but now we know that there's a relationship between the number of nanoparticles in a cubic meter of air and brain cancer. I mean, that's just the beginning, I'm sure, of a lot of other cancers. But then why don't you monitor the air in Endicott before this facility goes online? Find out how many nanoparticles you have in a cubic meter of air in Endicott High Street. Find that out now, so that when the thing comes online, you say you've got perfect air pollution control, which is going to work 100% of the time. Let's keep monitoring how much you have in the ambient air. So, and then if it goes up, then you know that your optimism was not justified. But Michael, that's, I think, one place that we can go with this cutting edge health concern of what nanoparticles can do. And that is to measure them in the ambient air and see how they change with sources of pollution. We should do much more of that, because I mean, this is serious stuff. If you're getting a relationship between even 2.5 micron particles in Mexico City with Alzheimer's disease type symptoms in adolescence, that is scary stuff. That is really scary stuff. So I think Mike Ewell, I always go to Mike Ewell now. I've sort of, since the early 2000s, most of my time is positive. I spend promoting zero waste, and I kind of resent the time that I have to spend beating up on a dead horse. It is a dead horse, but somehow certain politicians are keeping this dead horse alive. It's a stuffed horse. It's not pining for the, well, Monty Python. We need Monty Python at this time. Mike Ewell is the go-to man for telling you about air pollutions and about, shutting down that Hartford incinerator.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Well, Paul, since you handed me the torch there and Tracy's unmuted me, I'll just
Oh,
speak.
I tried to unmute you, yes.
Okay, no problem. Michael, I was just about to chat you privately, but if you'd like to share your information with me, that would be really helpful. The trash and tire incinerator in Hartford County, as you probably know, shut down a few years ago, but there's been a new plan to build an incinerator of the pyrolysis type in your area. And there are people that have been fighting that, and I'm not sure what the status is on it at the moment. But we should be in touch about that. And anyone who's in a different area and is not sure about what's in your area that needs some fighting, just be in touch with me. I'll drop my information into the chat box.
Great, thank you.
May I just add another comment, Michael? I'd be very happy to help out. I'm in the DC area. I could also help you out with the project that Mike Ewell just mentioned.
Okay, I thought I showed my ignorance that I said it's been about 10 years, and Mike Ewell said the incinerator apparently was closed down within that period of time.
But I'm referring to the new effort to build a different type of technology.
Okay, well, I'll be fighting that too.
I didn't get round to it today, but there have been no incinerator proposals in the United States, as I mentioned, since about 1997. But they are proposing. Every week we get some company called Never Done It So Safely in Our Lives, Incorporated, registered in Delaware, that comes in with, it's not an incinerator. We hate incinerators, but we got this new technology. It's a gasifying unit. It's a pyrolysis unit. It's a plasma arc. And I say, look, all these facilities are two-stage. The first stage is what you're talking about, gasification, pyrolysis, or plasma arc. That takes the solid waste to a gas, or sometimes a liquid. And then the second stage is to burn the gas. And it's the burning of that gas which then brings you back to the same health issues as incineration. So the correct terminology would be, unless they are gasifying and producing a gas or a liquid which they sell to the chemical industry as a feedstock, then gasification would be okay. But if they're burning it, the correct designation is gasifying incinerator, pyrolyzing incinerator, and plasma arc incinerator. I should add that even the leading combustion engineers in the world do not any longer believe that this is an escape route. It's incredibly difficult to take their pilot level studies in universities and scale them up to a commercial facility. In fact, there is no commercial gasification, pyrolyzing, or plasma arc facility handling mixed waste in the United States. None commercially available. And the official position of those experts who oppose it is the problem of you cannot use heterogeneous waste in these systems. It's just too complicated. You need a homogeneous waste stream. And if you have a homogeneous waste stream, there's really no need to burn it. You might as well recycle it.
Well,
And of course, if you burn it, you have the same issue of lack of sustainability and wasting the embedded energy as you have with incineration. So it really isn't a solution for the 21st century.
With that, I ask everyone to unmute and let's give a round of applause to Paul. If people can figure out how to unmute, that would be great. Okay, let us clap and cheer.
Hi, Paul. Hi, Tracy.
Hey, Paul. Hey. Is that Claudia?
Thanks, Paul.
Claudia. Hi.
Hi, Paul.
Claudia is our lawyer in Endicott fighting this lithium
really?
country.
Right. I had no idea. Congratulations.
Well, we're getting there. It's not done deal yet, but Paul has been a humongous help on the DEC side. So thank you, Paul.
Well, thank you. That was wonderful. And I like your point that it's really an overconsumption problem.
Yes.
And there's a lot to remember and a lot to inspire. So thank you, and everyone have a great night, and we'll all be in touch.
And
Thank you, Tracy.
Bye, Tracy.
Thank you,
Thanks,
Tracy.
Tracy.
Thanks, Tracy.
Thank
Thanks, Tracy.
everyone for coming and everyone for helping.
Yes.
Good
Thank
night.
you for joining.
Okay.
Take care.
Bye.
Good night. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
And if you're doing this, there is support. There are lots of other people, so we can all work together. Good night.
I
I'm ending. Bye.
Very good. Well done, Tracy. Well done.
No, well done you. Well done, Paul. Thank you so much.
Well, you gave me so much encouragement. Thank you.
Oh, yes. I'll send you the chat if I can figure out how to do it.
All right. Bye for now. Bye-bye.
Bye.